Hey guys, welcome to the Gimp Circus. To celebrate the recent-ish 15-year anniversary of Half-Life 2, and also the announcement of Half Life Alyx, I wanted to create a little video essay explaining my unyielding praise for the game. Then I decided that would be fucking boring and a total waste of time, so I took those talking points I had in mind and designated them to a letter of the alphabet and went through until all 26 letters were spoken for. 'Cause I'm just that cool of a guy. To start things off, I want to talk about the Half-Life 2 saga's use of achievements. For the most part, they're the ideal achievement set every game should strive to be. There are a few duds in there, namely that god-awful There Goes the Neighborhood for Episode 2. That one can go suck a camel's cock. But otherwise, they had fun, unique challenges to the levels, bump up replayability. Some, you can just play the game normally and unlock them. Others, you need to go out of your way to do a few extra things. But, like I said, those are usually fun anyway. But thankfully, none of them turned the game into a mind-numbingly boring grind session like we would see happen in games throughout the years afterwards. Even though Half-Life 2 released all the way back in 2004, I still think it's very much a pretty game to look at. Sure, some textures here and there are going to be kind of muddy, and the game definitely looks dated. You're not going to be confusing this for a modern game unless you're blind or just stupid. The visual and art design of Half-Life 2 is honestly astonishing, especially if you take into account how old the game is now. And granted, the game never really has any vibrant, crazy colors going on, but honestly, that kind of works in its favor more because everything looks as realistic as it could, especially with the game's use of lighting, which is honestly incredible. It helps to preserve so much visual quality to the game. Another important aspect to think about are the character faces. These faces are so well done. They've really only been surpassed in the last, 5-6 years about, with Naughty Dog and The Last of Us really coming into play here. These faces are astonishing. And again, 2004, the first console Half-Life 2 released on was the original Xbox. Think about what else came out around that time. You got Fable, Morrowind, and Halo. Seriously, look at those games and compare them to Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2 blows them away, no contest. The Combine are a perfect representation of an oppressive regime that took over the world. They're total dicks. A quintessential example of their dickery is a trash can cop in the beginning. He had so many options for what to do with that can. He could have asked you nicely to take care of it. He could have just pushed it in so it would fall in the trash all by himself. He could have just fucking ignored it. But no, he had to go knock you on the ground and tell you to go pick it up like a little bitch. This is why the only option you can take here is to pick it up and throw it at him as hard as you can. And then continue to run circles around him while picking up the can and throwing it at him again and again and again because you don't have a crowbar to hit him over the head with yet. There's not really a single spot in the game I can think of where I didn't feel like I was under the watchful eye of an otherworldly big brother. No matter what event just played out, it felt like the Combine were one step ahead. They are always in control, and every small step of progress I take as Gordon Freeman, it just feels like they're ahead of me and know what I'm about to do. So many different levels throughout the game, you can just look around and see the destruction the Combine have brought. Namely, Ravenholm, which I'll talk about later here. Valve did an excellent job making you want to hate these guys. Also, fuck the trash can cop. Dude's a dick. Driving sections are smartly layered out throughout the entire Half-Life 2 saga. They're played from the first-person perspective, like the rest of the game, which is notable because this is some of the finest driving around in first-person this side of Far Cry. I mean, it definitely isn't perfect. The physics engine definitely gets in the way sometimes, But these sections are honestly some of the most memorable moments for me of this game. I mean, the simple fact alone that they possess the ability for enjoyment speaks volumes here. Fucking Halo Combat Evolved, which pioneered console shooters, has players driving from the third person perspective. To me, this says a lot. There are three parts that make up the interactive video experience known as Half Life 2. You got the base game, you got episode 1, and you got episode 2. All three parts are damn fine gaming experiences. However, if I was going to rank them, because why wouldn't I? Kind of a whole dealy bob, it would look something like this. Episode 1 feels more like an expansion, sort of like Blue Shift, the expansions for the first game, at least in terms of length, not necessarily like quality wise. But episode 2 is kind of weird. It feels longer and more worthwhile than those, but it's not fleshed out enough to be like a whole new game. So it feels more of just like a short game or like an MMO expansion or something. With a noticeable absence of an episode 3 or even Half-Life 3, there's a lot of story threads that just never get resolved. And I don't really need to bring up the cliffhanger episode 2 ends on for sake of my own sanity. But despite all this, if you're new to Half-Life, highly recommend picking it up. Maybe start with the first game or with Black Mesa, since that's pretty close to being done. But everything Half-Life related is very much worth going through. Gordon Freeman, protagonist, scientist, bloodthirsty killer, possible madman, mute. The Half-Life games, along with the Zelda games, probably the two biggest examples of silent protagonists being used in games. The whole purpose of a silent protagonist is for the main character of a game to act as an extension of the player and to further immerse yourself in the game's world, story, and action. Ultimately, this works pretty well for Half-Life. It's just pretty immersion breaking though that I can't fully absorb myself into Gordon Freeman because I'm not a giant nerd. Haha, actually, I am. But I would still say I can relate more to a Keebler elf rolling around, throwing other people's pots more than some scientist. How can some creepy little freak in a suit become iconic? Easy. Make him mysterious and important. Since Half-Life 1, the G-Man has been popping in and out of Gordon's reality seemingly at random. Sometimes he'll just be strolling past a window. Others it'll be a hallway. But sometimes he'll be placed to reveal a tiny little tidbit of the bigger picture of the Half-Life universe. No one really has a good grasp on who or what he is, but that's really just a large part of his appeal. Everyone and their mother loves a good mystery, and Valve's mystery of who the fuck is this dude is more than likely going to go without an answer for quite some time, if not for all of eternity. But it does help build in the frenzy and chaos of the Half-Life freedom, for better or for worse. You can boil the essence of Half-Life's gameplay down into a murder sandbox. So now let's talk about the assortment of weapons you have. All the stereotypical first-person shooter bases are covered. You got your pistol, your shotgun, SMGs. Half-Life has it all. But there are some clever standouts. Gravity gun, the crossbow that shoots heated rebar and acts as the sniper for the game. You got the antlion pheromone pod, which I love using when I can. I still wish that there was more. More variety with the basic guns, more crazy sci-fi weapons like the first game had, and just kind of like more weapons overall. Not like a stupid amount like Call of Duty campaigns have, but just like 3 or 4 more just to really spice everything up. Because while every weapon is good and does have a purpose, its purpose really just comes down to how far away is the thing you're trying to shoot at. If I had to pull one word out of the magical hat that is my brain to describe Half-Life 2, it would be intelligent. Every design decision is sophisticated. Playing through this saga again gave me the idea that Valve had thought of everything in every single scenario. How do you properly lead players through levels without holding their hands? How do you spice up combat encounters with repeatedly familiar enemy types? How well can a Vortigaunt sing? The puzzles are fun, rewarding, and complicated enough to not waste your time, but they're also not obtuse enough to make you feel like a doo-doo brain. The intelligence demonstrated in Half-Life 2's gameplay and design doesn't stop there, though. It's also noticeable within the story and plot details. I mean, you play as a scientist, for crying out loud. Usually those guys are pretty damn smart. So you know the muscle car in that one section of Half-Life 2? Well, at one point in time, that was supposed to be a jalopy. I wish it would have been a jalopy. That would have been funny. Apparently, Valve thought the normal Headcrab zombies were a little bit too boring and wanted them to turn on the Combine so they could be tankier versions of them, or as Alyx likes to call them, Zombine. And then they thought even that was too boring. Let's have them kamikaze the fuck out of themselves. No, seriously, these annoying bastards love to whip out the grenades more than creepy dudes in trench coats like to whip out their cocks in supermarkets. Games can become influential for a plethora of reasons. Controls, graphics, storytelling. But what makes the influence of Half-Life 2 so unique is that it's influential for a little bit of all those. And yet it doesn't really get that much credit. See, if you look at the other games that are coming out around the same time as Half-Life 2, none of them really do anything in the same way. And everything Half-Life 2 does was so ahead of its time. Yet, if you scour developer interviews and Q&As for influences of certain games, Half-Life in general never really comes up that often, if at all. Which is super mind-boggling, considering it's nowhere near a cult classic. These games have sold a fuck ton, and they're still loved and clamored for to this day. There's not really any sort of games calling themselves a Half-Life clone, and it certainly hasn't gotten to the point of being a genre like Souls-likes. And if you ask me, all this is super disappointing, because I would love to see more games style themselves after Half-Life and everything that's done, because to this day it's still so damn unique and interesting. Loading screens in games are like roller coasters. They can go up, they can go down. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. But no matter what, some little kid is crying for their mommy, and a drunken sorority girl is puking on the backside of your head. Say what you will about present-day Bethesda, but at least they know how to make a somewhat decent loading screen. Fallout 4 and Skyrim display a somewhat interactive game model to gaze upon and turn a little bit. And in Fallout 4 you can make it all green and wiry. Ooh. Mass Effect and Resident Evil both play a little animation during their loading times, so that it seems like it's not loading, but you're just sitting around waiting for the game to load. Yeah. But of all the possible ideas other developers have come up with in the entire history of gaming, when Valve was making Half-Life 2, they sat down and was like, alright, when we need to load a next area, or map, as the eggheads call them, the game should just completely freeze up with some generic bland-ass text popping up on the screen saying, loading. It's annoying, totally disrupts the flow of the game, and is definitely one of my least favorite things about Half-Life 2. Papa Gaben? Orange. The color of oranges. And things with a similar color to oranges. Like orange crayons. And the orange box. Speaking of the orange box, when it came out in 2007, it was, and still is, a massive achievement in terms of value and quality, that makes the current big budget game industry look like a bunch of fucking losers. Seriously, this thing is such a good value. There's nothing that even compares to it, even today. In a sea of remasters, remakes, reskins, re-releases, microtransactions, Skinner boxes, fucking loot boxes, same damn thing, the orange box shines brighter than ever. Most of the games featured in this collection were brand new to consoles at the time, and even Episode 2 and Portal never even came out before this. Now that's what I call an orgy worth showing up for. Physics. The game has them. Next. Okay. So the physics of Half-Life 2 were a monument worthy of colossal celebration when it first released. Valve usually showcases this in-game with different physics puzzles that you have to figure out and navigate through, like deciding which end of a plank you have to throw more bricks on. And they also made a gun for the sole purpose of picking shit up and chucking it at dudes to commit murder, usually with some pretty funny results. To this day, the physics system is still impressive, especially considering since physics in games haven't really evolved much, if at all, since 04. This game really still serves as a blueprint for how physics in games should work 15 years later. Take that for what you will. Alyx Vance is the goddamn queen of the Half-Life games. She cares for you, is always willing to lend a helping hand. She constantly blocks me from going anywhere I'm trying to go. Alyx, you're blocking my shots! Oh, now you're flirting with me? That's nice and all, but we kind of have more important things to take care of. Like, I don't know, save your father, free all of humanity from oppressive alien regime, shooting hoops with your robotic dog. Ravenholm is without a doubt one of my favorite video game levels ever. The atmosphere in it is so thick you could cut it with a knife, and noticeably different from anything else Half-Life related, but also anything Valve has really done. If you told me Ravenholm came out of a completely different game and it was a horror game, I would be very inclined to believe you. Yet, despite being so strikingly different, it still manages to feel like it belongs within Half-Life 2. The backstory for how this city is the way it is now is really engaging and makes you hate the Combine even more. It's also the first full level in the game that you have to experiment with the gravity gun, and they let you go all out with it. Literally every piece of trash littered around there is an item perfectly made for taking care of the Headcrab zombies that littered it. Not to mention the few fire and spinning blade traps that are scattered throughout too. It really just comes together super fucking nicely. The Source engine, which is the engine that Half-Life 2 and the episodes were created in, was later used for Portal, Portal 2, CSGO, Titanfall 2, and even Apex Legends. Now, with the Valve games, they make sense. They're roughly within 5 years of Half-Life 2 coming out, and it's Valve. Of course, they're going to use their own engine for their own games. But why would Respawn use it for Titanfall 2 and Apex Legends so long after it was created? Because that's just how bitchin' it is. Over a decade later, it can still be squeezed and strangled for some bit of life out of it. Some may look at Half-Life 2 and think it's fairly no frills or kind of boring or basic, and in a way, I can see where they're coming from. What makes Half-Life 2 such an enjoyable game to play isn't how different everyone's playthrough can be, how big the open world is, or how the AI reacts to the player and their decisions. See, for me, it's all about how tightly knit each individual component of the game as a whole is, and how cleanly they all flow into one another. The controls, the graphics, the story, the gameplay, the sound design, the level design. Half-Life 2 exceeds in all these departments. Not a single thread feels like it's out of place. And that's just the beauty of this game. Uprising is a reasonably palpable theme within Half-Life 2. In the opening moments, you join up with the Resistance to fight off the Combine's death grip on humanity's metaphorical cock. The game offers this sense of David versus Goliath every step of the way. It also offers this sense that the Combine turned all of the remaining remnants of humanity into the populace of Idiocracy. Because everyone's a fucking moron. I watched not one, but 2 different NPCs walk into barnacle tons within a minute of each other. And what did the others in our group do while they were watching their friends being propelled up to their beheading? They just sat and gawked at me talking about how great I was. So what did I do during this? I just laughed my fucking ass off because they deserved it. No, seriously, it's no wonder Gordon is not only the symbol of the Resistance, but pretty much its fucking leader. It's because everyone's so stupid. It's like, of course they would go, ooh, science person, yeah, he's our leader. Because what else are they gonna fucking do? When a whole conga line of freedom fighters is hot on your heels, suicide becomes an increasingly delicious temptation. What can I or anyone else say about Valve which hasn't been said a million times over already? There's enough memes about Valve being afraid of the number 3 and message board posts full of people reminiscing about how they used to make video games that they could fill a cold, desolate hole in my chest where my heart used to be. So, ignoring all of that as much as possible, I want to give credit where credit is due and thank Valve for making some of the most amazing games the industry has ever seen. Controversial opinion, I know. Valve's track record is actually fairly reminiscent to Blizzard's. Neither really invented or reinvented genres that they made games in, or mask one and call it something stupid like, I don't know, a Strand game or something. But what they both did was take the basic ideas of a genre and make a game that perfected it. Most of Valve's games are considered to be timeless and some of the best games ever made because of this. Despite their recent output being either lackluster or just not appealing to me whatsoever, and the fact that most of their writers and directors from their quote-unquote golden age are long gone, my cock is still rock hard and wagging around like a little puppy's tail due to my excitement for Half Life Alyx and what Valve can really bring to the VR scene. The world building in Half Life 2 is rich and plentiful. Almost every conversation in the game expands my brain to the deep history of the events which transpired in between Half Life 1 and 2, most notably the 7-Hour War. And if it's not talk about the story, it's talk about physics and other scientific crap. You know, for a game where every main character is a scientist, there sure is a wealth of big boy words. It's not only noteworthy that what little plot details that there are only come from dialogue instead of cutscenes, but it's really only dished out at a few sentences at a time. And yet, the universe of Half-Life seems gigantic enough to warrant multiple books, a movie tie-in, and a multi-season Netflix show. The extraterrestrial beings from the Half-Life series hail from a place known as Zen, making them Zenites, Zenisons, Zenterrestrials. Anyway, some of them make a return appearance in the sequel. Barnacles, Headcrabs, Vortigaunts, who, P.S., are on your side now and have amazing singing voices. And while there are some new ones, kinda, sorta, it's pretty much just antlions. Much like the weapons, I would have loved to see some more variety with them, even if it was just bringing back some more from the first game. Which, while yes, I understand the Menace of the Combine is supposed to be center stage here. Just imagine how terrifying and awesome it would be if one of the car sections you're driving around fleeing from a gargantuan, gargantuna, you know, the big blue things that shoot fire from their hands. A set piece like that would just be amazing and super memorable. Do the humans in Half-Life 2 eat? No, seriously, do they? Cannot for the life of me remember anyone in Half-Life 2, Episode 1, or Episode 2 mentioning about how they're hungry or craving for a certain food or yearning for it. Can you tell I struggled to come up with something for this spot? Next! Yes, the gravity gun absolutely deserves its own spot here. Think about how many times I brought it up already. Probably 3-ish times? That's higher than I can fucking count. That simple fact alone should tell you enough about how I feel about it. It lets you take almost any little piece of trash lying around a level and blast dudes in the fucking face with it. It takes the integral physics system and stretches it beyond just puzzles or goofs and laughs. It blends into the combat seamlessly and near perfectly. I struggle to think of any other game where you get an item or a power up designed to spice up the gameplay in a drastic way and make you feel like a god, and it isn't just like taken from you at the end of the level or the section. You have, from the very moment you get the gravity gun in your greasy little goblin hands until the very end of episode 2 to just experiment and have fun with this weapon. That's partly of what. Not only that, but Valve's confidence towards this weapon being so fun to use is apparent with just how much of the saga is designed towards the player using it. And even when it's not expressly told through you with design language that you should be using it, or even that you can, it's still always a viable option. Honestly, the grav gun is a better icon for the series than the crowbar. All I really wanted to do was find an excuse to talk about Half-Life, and I think I managed to do that in some shape or form. Maybe? I'm still not sure about that. And this whole thing probably turned out like molten trash. But if you checked it out and stuck around this long, I just wanted to say thank you. Half-Life 2 is easily one of my favorite games ever. It's probably in like the top 10. And no one that I talk about games with regularly really has any affiliation with Half-Life whatsoever. So this is just kind of an outlet for that. So thanks for just listening to me ramble on and do something stupid with it.